that for a slice of fried gold?
Yeah, boy!
Have you checked the children?
You're one of us.
I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
I'd buy that for $1.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk here.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
Well, hello and welcome to Cinema Shock. It's the podcast devoted, or the show devoted to bringing you the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I am one of your hosts, Gary Horn.
I am co-host Justin Bishop. We are joined this week by writer Justin Bishop. We are joined this week by writer, comedian, and David Hasselhoff enthusiast, Mr. Todd Davis.
Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. How's it going?
That one tickled him.
Yeah.
Todd's a big fan of Knight Rider right here.
All
right, welcome to week 5 of our Romero Savini extravaganza, an epic in the making. We're halfway through after this week, guys. This is week 5. Are you very excited, Todd? I mean, you
just silenced Justin.
Hey.
You said yay.
Yay! I mean, I'm enthusiastic.
You are. That's why we bring you on the show, Todd.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun with you here. We've grown accustomed to Romero Savini. I feel like I know him better as a person, and I feel like it's as though I can feel his scruffy gray beard next to mine.
Oh man, that's lovely. He's a lot taller than you, though. I think he'd have to lean down to do that, Gary.
How tall is he?
And he does.
Romero's like 6'5", 6'6".
Get out of town.
I mean,
I
not
did
anymore.
Not realize he was that tall.
Yeah, he's a very large man.
Now he's 6 feet under.
Oh no.
He's not wrong. It's not. I don't think it's offensive to say somebody has died.
Yeah.
He died 3 years ago or something, right?
Yeah, it just felt so heartless. Although I was going to take the joke about the scruffy gray beard, like when he said he'd have to lean down, I was like, and he does at night when I'm sleeping. That's me. Anyway.
So after the success of Dawn of the Dead, Romero, we talked about that a little bit last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess. Dawn of the Dead was 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? Dawn of the Dead was 2 weeks ago, wasn't it? How that was his first major success, or not first major success, but his biggest mainstream success up to this point. And Hollywood came a knocking. And so he had the clout to make just about any project that he wanted after that movie. And his very next film was one that he had actually had in the works for years. From 1981, good year, 1981, I would say. Wouldn't you say, Gary?
Yeah. I mean, it's the year of our Lord.
That's the year your mom front pooped you out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what you want me to say to that. I mean, it's true.
It's true.
I did. It's the last time I saw her vagina.
Oh, come on now.
That's comforting to know. Honestly, I'm glad that's a true statement.
I feel like that there's nothing wrong with that.
No, I think that's perfectly normal.
Once, courageous knights roamed the land, searching for adventure, ready to brave any challenge. Knight Riders. The knight is a fighting machine, disciplined in mind and heart, and noble to the death. Knight Riders. Action. Adventure. Romance. Heraldry. Pageantry. And magic.
Magic got to do with the soul, man. Only the soul's got destiny.
Knight Riders. We ride
For most people, George Romero's name is synonymous with the horror genre. And as we've already discussed in this series, it wasn't ever really his intent to be a quote-unquote horror filmmaker. After the success of his zombie movies, that's exactly what he became. So it may come as a surprise to folks who are unfamiliar with this film, including really the three of us. I mean, we all knew about it, but Gary didn't. He had never heard of this movie before. We were fairly unfamiliar with what this movie was about. And I feel like a lot of people maybe who are even listening to us right now may have heard of it or may have seen the poster, but may not have known what the movie was.
We thought it was about back of house at medieval times. It was a joke Tom made earlier.
Yeah.
It may come as a surprise, though, to people that his follow-up to his biggest success so far is a character drama, a 2.5-hour character drama about a bunch of LARPing Renaissance Fair nerds.
Yeah, I think that every time it's like he makes a zombie movie.
Renaissance Fair nerds.
Yeah, I think that every time it's like he makes a zombie movie and then he's just like, God, I just got to get away from this. But they always, this is the story of zombies, man. They just keep coming.
Well, I mean, look, think about it. If you just did a big thing that was super successful for all of your investors or for whatever studio you're a part of, you kind of, for at least one project, you kind of get the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened on this. I don't think this is necessarily Romero trying to get out of horror filmmaking, because he was already at work on a couple of Stephen King adaptations that are set firmly within the horror genre. But I think that he probably knew that this was the only time, or it may possibly be the only time in his career that he would have the pull to get something like this made, because he knew that this is not a movie but he now had the ability and the clout to get this movie made.
Right. But if you think, and again, like I said, that this is kind of what happens. Look at Peter Jackson with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And then they kind of tossed him the keys to the kingdom and said, hey, look, whatever you want to do. And he went and made King Kong, and it was a lot of fun. It was a passion project of his, and he did the big studio thing, won a bunch of awards, got him a bunch of money, and then they let him do whatever he wants. Same thing kind of happened with Chris Nolan too. Like, he cranked out some really great Batman movies, and then they're like, all right, whatever you got in the works, go for it.
Yeah.
And,
I think
but not unlike zombies, the hobbits just keep coming.
That's true. Well, I think even like with the Peter Jackson example, I think a better example would be The Lovely Bones. Because King Kong was another major success, but The Lovely Bones is kind of a more personal, a smaller story, that was a real passion project of his as well.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's a good point.
For Romero, filmmaking was a family affair. As we've already seen in this series, Romero was one of those filmmakers who'd like to surround himself with familiar faces. These are people that he'd worked with in the past collaborators, schoolmates, family, friends. He was a truly regional filmmaker. And Pittsburgh's his Hollywood. He was not a Hollywood guy. He could have been a Hollywood guy, but he wanted to work in Pittsburgh, and that was his studio. That was his backlot. And over the years, he collected a loyal cast and crew family to help him out with that. And you'll see a lot of those faces in this movie as well. You'll see his wife, Christine, or his future wife, Christine. I think they got married after this movie wrapped, if I remember correctly. And you've got Martin's John Amplas, and of course, the co-star of this whole series, Mr. Married after this movie wrapped, if I remember correctly. And you've got Martin's John Amplas, and of course, the co-star of this whole series, Mr. Tom Savini.
I like that guy. Can I tell you something, though, that really drives you crazy? When you think of something and it just won't go away, I don't know if you guys have ever experienced this, so I just have to say this. The Hob hits keep on coming. That's just been in the back of my mind this whole time. And
I'm really glad you got that. Really glad you got that out of your system.
After I said it, I was like, I'm not going to make that joke, and I'm going to let it go. But I couldn't, and it just keeps playing in my mind, just doing something like, oh, it's NZM Radio, Mordor. The Hob hits keep on coming.
No, I totally get it. I've had the song Benny and the Jets stuck in my head for about 3 weeks now.
Oh, I
So-
feel like I
so
feel
I'm-
good though that we got it out of the way. We can go back to Savini
Yeah. Okay.
and talking about the Savini bikini.
Oh man,
Joke. Oh,
Don't knock it because you didn't think of it.
it's such a good.
Such
No,
an
I'm saying
obvious
that.
joke. You don't-
he's
No,
mad at
it's- I
himself.
get it.
For
You're the
No,
not.
I'm mad
comedian.
at myself.
So the thing is, after the success of Dawn of the Dead, Romero could have gone the Hollywood route. I'm sure he was getting tons of offers from Hollywood to make horror movies, and I'm sure he could have cashed in on that and made a lot of money. But that's not who Romero was. He chose to stay independent. He was always independent. And he chose to stay in Pittsburgh for the majority of his career, honestly. Like, he never ended up going to Hollywood. When he finally left Pittsburgh, it was to go to Canada, to move to Toronto. So he never was a Hollywood guy. Instead of moving to Hollywood to make whatever horror movies they might have tried to throw his way, he instead made what is probably his most personal film, and one that expresses on screen in its story his desire to stay independent, to never sell out to the man. So in medieval times, it depicted the darker side of medieval lore. But after he spent a few years directing sports documentaries, which we discussed back in our second episode of this series, we talked about things like the O.J. Simpson movie and stuff, but he's also filming a lot of racing stuff. He did one called Driver, Mario Andretti, which obviously was about Mario Andretti, the race car driver. And he kind of got inspired a little bit by that. And he retooled this concept to revolve around modern day motorcycle riding nights. And another source of inspiration for that change came from Sam Arkoff. We've talked about Sam Arkoff on this show already a couple of times. He was the B-movie producer who ran American International Pictures. He's the guy who didn't want Night of the Living Dead because it was in black and white, or he didn't want Ben to die at the end, that same guy. He'd already turned down Romero twice over the years, and Romero pitched this to him again, and this is what Romero has to say about that meeting.
Knightriders was funny. I had written a script about basically the same story, but I had them on horseback. I modeled it after there was a group called Society for Creative Anachronism that stages these jousts. And I was pitching it around. And it was actually Sam Arkoff. We pitched it to Sam Arkoff. And he said, I'll tell you what, put the guys on motorcycles and maybe I'm interested.
It's going to be interesting, or it's interesting that Romero finally just took his advice and went with something he said.
Yeah, he did. I mean,
he owed it to him.
Yeah, he let it stew for a while, and then finally he's just like, yeah, man, that's not a bad idea. He kind of came around to it. So he rewrote the script. He set it in a modern era, and he put his knights on the back of motorcycles. And he was inspired by wrote the script. He set it in a modern era, and he put his knights on the back of motorcycles. And he was inspired by local, like, Renaissance fair troops, which at the time that he was writing this was a fairly recent phenomenon. Like, now, I mean, Ren fairs are everywhere. They're a big thing. But at the time, like, that was sort of a new concept that they were depicting here.
Yeah, I always wondered kind of how that got started, because it seems very
nerdy.
Well, I was gonna say very nerdy, but like very specific.
Very
nerdy.
specific type of nerd.
Yeah, like theater kids would be really into it, or the Dungeons and Dragons folks, my people.
I wonder if his idea would have been like to actually make them King Arthur and stuff like that, if that was the thing.
In this, I mean, I think that the characters in this are very much modeled after those types. I would say that
actually make them King Arthur and stuff like that, if that was the thing.
In this, I mean, I think that the characters in this are very much modeled after those types. I would say that.
Well, I meant if he had kept the original concept of setting it in medieval times, like if he would have just made it. Because what's weird is although Arkoff didn't like it, I mean, I think that same year that this movie was released, like Excalibur came out.
The same day.
Oh, the same day. Well,
they came out on the same day.
So even weirder.
Yeah. So, and of course, Excalibur was like huge. And as we'll discuss, this movie.
That would have been one of those weird things, though, like Hollywood does, where like Dante's Peak and Volcano come out right around the same time, or Deep Impact and Armageddon or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the year of the medieval movies. I mean, this movie definitely is inspired by medieval lore, but in a pretty interesting way. But I think it's a fun twist to, like medieval lore as an inspiration, like the whole like chivalrous life and things like that as their inspiration. Right. I think works better because it's people modeling themselves after something that's really more of a myth than anything that actually happened in history. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes you think about people like John Krakauer's book Into the Wild, which got made into a film not that long ago. But Chris McCandless kind of did that, where you totally reject everything, the standard ideas of like money and society. It all gets thrown away for this life free from all that stuff, and you're holding yourself to a higher ideal.
I mean, that's very similar to what's going on with Billy in this movie.
Yeah, and there's similar. And I mean, there is something very romantic about it, but we should probably get some money at some point because we're hungry.
Much like Debbie Does Dallas was originally a high concept character drama.
So Romero's retooled this to have motorcycles. I mean, that's kind of fun. It allows him to do some fun stunts and whatnot. And it just so happens, as we've discussed, like in Dawn of the Dead, one of his very good friends and collaborators was a motorcycle enthusiast, Mr. Tom Savini. Now, Savini doesn't have a whole lot to do in Knight Riders with his makeup effects skills. There is very little blood. I mean, he's still he still has that credit at the end of the film. He's still the makeup effects supervisor, but there's very little blood in this movie. I mean, he made like the stitches on Billy when he gets injured, and there's a couple moments, but the story doesn't lend itself to that. There's very little real violence in this movie, even when there is violence on Billy when he gets injured, and there's a couple moments, but the story doesn't lend itself to that. There's very little real violence in this movie. Even when there is violence, most of the time it's sort of for fun, almost, Ed
Harris has some weird fucking wound that pops back up randomly.
Well, they talk. I mean, he got pinched by his armor during the battle.
Yeah, it's just weird. It's like you can't believe. I don't know. Anyway, doesn't matter right now. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it's funny. Like he took a while to bleed out. That's all I'm saying.
Well, he kept reopening the wound.
Yeah.
He got it stitched up, then it reopened.
Yeah.
That's how that works.
When
you're not taking care of yourself, as King Billy does not.
He looks in great shape. I don't know why you would say something like that.
He does look in great shape. Ed Harris has incredible posture.
He does.
What about the hairline?
Yeah,
right.
It was already. It was going by this early in his career. It's,
very
impressive.
early.
Yeah, he looks like he's about our age, but he also looks 50. Like he's like he's both.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about Savini, so let's finish Savini.
Yeah, let's go back to Savini. So Savini is the makeup effects guy in this movie, but Knight Riders also acted as the biggest on-screen role that Savini had been given so far. And you get to see a lot more of him in this movie than you had in any of the previous Romero films.
Now we're going to talk about the Savini bikini, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Get to the Savini bikini. No, I did not realize he was ever in like this high of a billing, like in a movie.
Oh, he's like the second lead in the movie, basically.
Yeah. I just I've known him as Tom Savini, the makeup guy, and also like, hey, catch the right movie, you can see him in a nice little character
acting side as. Like he was being given cameos by filmmakers who admired his makeup work. They're like, oh, this guy can act, without seeming like a block of wood, like a lot of non-actors would. But he's not a non-actor. Like as we discussed, like back in episode 2 of this, he had a big background in theater. Like that, he was an actor even before he was a makeup guy. He was an actor, or he was honing those skills at the same time.
That's what the show's for. You learn so much.
You learn. It's educational. And
There you
as
go.
he had done in previous Romero films, Savini also worked as a stuntman on this film. Now, he was clearly not the only stuntman, and he did actually have a stunt double. But a lot of times when you see Savini on the back of a motorcycle, or even scenes where he falls off of a motorcycle, that was really Savini. Like, a lot of times Romero would like ask him to do a stunt, and he would have to like go tell his stunt double, hey, George wants me to do this one. And it's me. And he would have to like go tell his stunt double, hey, George wants me to do this one. And it's me himself.
Yeah, it's weird. That was another thing I never knew about him before we started this series. Like, I never really realized that he was a stunt guy as well. But, I think actually right before we started this series, I saw Kane Hodder on The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob Briggs, and he mentioned Savini and like stunt stuff, as Kane Hodder is known for. And they seem to have like a little rivalry going. And, they were talking about bench pressing, and he's like, like, how much can you still bench press? He's like, I don't know, just more than Savini. I can tell you that much.
Seeing how good Savini is in this makes me wonder why we haven't seen more of him as an actor.
Well, I was just about to say, I think honestly, I mean, he's primarily stunts, primarily effects, but you can see when he's with Ed Harris, who's a pretty good actor.
Yeah.
We'll just say he's a pretty good actor. I think being on that brings his level up. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, for me, because I think I've seen a lot, I think Gary, you were saying it's a lot of cameo stuff and a lot of character, small bit roles and whatnot. But like seeing him opposite Ed Harris, I was like, yeah, he should have probably done more. I don't know of anything after this where he's as good as he is in this.
Well, I don't know that he was ever given the opportunity to have this big of a role after this. I can't recall any.
Maybe it was a Romero thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how good he'd be in meatier dramatic roles because there's no real proof of that. So I can't say it one way or the other, but
maybe it was a Romero thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how good he'd be in meatier dramatic roles because there's no real proof of that. So I can't say it one way or the other, but he is very charismatic.
Yeah.
In real life and on camera. So that makes him pretty perfect for roles like this. And for a lot of the other roles, like Todd's referenced his role in From Dusk Till Dawn a couple of times on this series, and roles like that, like just, the go-to like character actor guy. He's got enough charisma to play that kind of guy, you know. And his character that he plays in this, Morgan, the Black Knight, he could have easily just been portrayed as just a total asshole. But Savini does give him a humanity. Like he never really becomes like a villain in this, like he's misguided, but he's not nefarious necessarily.
There's that slight tinge of something's nice about him still. Like you can't hate him all the way, which is interesting actually sometimes on how you perceive him in certain points. Also, Savini's face, though, he's got a weird, unique face.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
thought I'd point that out.
To go back to what you were just saying, Gary, I think there are some interesting aspects of Ed Harris's character in Billy that he's holding to those ideals so tightly that he's letting his family slip through his fingers.
Yeah, I feel like I want to get into that. I feel like we'll talk about some more about that character stuff. But yeah.
So Ed Harris at the time, of course, we know Ed Harris now. He's in all kinds of major stuff. He would have his kind of mainstream breakthrough role right after this with The Right Stuff, where he played John Glenn. But we know him from like The Abyss, A History of Violence, more recently Westworld on HBO, where he had a pretty big role.
Rock.
The Rock, like film role. His second major film role. I think he'd had one previous one before where it was like a very small bit part. But right before this, he played the villain in a Charles Bronson movie called Borderline.
This was definitely his like first ever top billed performance in a feature.
Yeah. And he began his career on stage and spent the latter part of the 70s doing pretty steady work on television before making the jump to the big screen. And
he actually knew how to ride a motorcycle. Was digging up stuff on him, and he knew how to ride the motorcycle because he had been in Chips, and so he already
really?
had the skills.
Because on the commentary that I was on this with Romero, it's Romero and Savini and Christine Romero, and John Amplas pops in for a little while. They talk about how Harris did not feel comfortable on the motorcycle.
Well, somebody lying, man.
Yeah, they talk.
lying.
And John Amplas pops in for a little while. They talk about how Harris did not feel comfortable on the motorcycle.
Well, somebody lying, man.
Yeah,
Somebody lying.
They talk about how like he had to basically learn to ride a motorcycle on set, and like, but he got very comfortable throughout it to where he was wanting to do, where they're riding out on the road and things like that. He wanted to do that himself, but at first they say that he was pretty unsteady on it.
Yeah, maybe Ed Harris is lying. He's a prankster. I read that like throughout the filming of this movie, like at the hotel they would be staying at, he was known for that, like constantly pranking people.
Really?
Yeah, that he just loved to fuck with you.
Huh.
Like,
I think
which
he's
is
really
weird for
good.
him. I just can't picture. I don't know.
Yeah, he seems so serious,
Yeah,
Never seen Ed Harris in a romantic comedy.
exactly.
See, I'm picturing him like saying like, "Ha, gotcha," whatever, whatever, but like in the tone that he uses from The Rock, it's like, "Fuck you, motherfucker."
Does not sound like Ed Harris from The Rock.
I know. It doesn't sound like him at all. That was terrible, but just kind of like, "Ah, got you."
All
Put
right.
the phone down.
We'll be right back with more Hobbit Radio. The Hobbits keep on coming.
I think Harris is really good here. There is something about, we joked about his posture and his hairline, but it does make him seem more mature and more of like a leader than someone his age normally would, I guess, because again, he's only 30 years old in this. And it's a really great, very nuanced performance, I think. And Harris is not afraid to go big as necessary or go really dark sometimes as necessary.
I think most of his hairline went to his chest, just to be clear. And it's weird because he has like he's back to the thing that Todd was just talking about. I mean, Ed Harris in this movie is just, he's phenomenal. Like he's
really good. Yeah,
he walks this weird line of being too much or not too much, but like, is he a dick? Maybe, kind of, but he's also got this innocence about him. And, it's just a weird something about Ed Harris. It feels like nobody else could pull it off quite like him.
Well, I think there's some nuances in the character development where he gets put in the magazine and they're talking about it, but he clearly has a past as some sort of competitive writer. And, when it gets brought up in the magazine, he's taken aback. And I think he explores every avenue of that. And as his friends are drifting closer to that world, I think he explores every avenue of that. And as his friends are drifting closer to that world of wanting to get money and sponsorships and blah, 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 he's remembering like all the hardships that came with that life. And that's why he steers so hard the other direction, which ends up making him kind of come across like a dick. And
well, that's an interesting way of reading it, because I would say that I saw it more of as he was looking at this as this chivalry, this knightdom, this attitude was everything he believed in. And the traveling roadshow was exactly everything he felt was pure. And so the second it starts to seep into this other territory of entertainment, you're losing it basically. And so he's tried to just hang on to this lifestyle and this belief system, essentially. You're losing it basically. And so he's tried to just hang on to this lifestyle and this belief system, essentially.
Yeah.
So other members of the cast included Romero's wife, Christine, who we already mentioned earlier. And, of course, Dawn of the Dead's Ken Foree, Scott Reiniger, they're both in there. In pretty small roles, which is kind of funny because they were the leads in that film. But that's kind of what happens. Even, John Amplas has a very small role in this. I mean, his credited as Whiteface. I think he's like a mime or a court jester.
Yeah.
So.
Which,
and then
funnily enough, will not get you canceled today. It's exactly the right one to
do. Several actors, including Morgan Freeman, auditioned for the role of Merlin before the part went to a performer named Brother Blue,
who is a total badass. I don't
he
know.
Is. I do want to say, though, that I also saw Tony Todd and Lawrence Fishburne. Not to just dwell on this whiteface thing or like any tiptoeing around racist Hollywood or me, I guess, apparently. But no, I was just thinking, as I was watching it, I was like, do all the black actors just have to go to Romero because like this is the guy that will cast black people? Well, like, because his casting is diverse and he was well ahead of the curve on that.
I mean, this is
sound logic.
A decade and a half after he had done it for Night of the Living Dead.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like they're like, oh, hey, this guy actually cast black people. Let's all go audition for George Romero movies.
So Brother Blue, by the way, I don't know if you guys, I went down a rabbit hole looking at his stuff, and he is incredible. Like he's a legendary character in the Boston area. This guy studied at Harvard and at the Yale School of Drama, and he got a PhD in divinity with pastoral sacred storytelling. That's what his PhD was in. Yeah. He was basically a professional storyteller, which I didn't even know was ever a thing. And it's pretty incredible to watch him. He would travel all around the world telling stories and regularly performed on the streets around Cambridge. Both Boston and Cambridge, the city councils at both of those cities have named him their official city storyteller. That's awesome. He does a lot of like Shakespeare. He does a lot of Shakespeare, but in this cool, like beat poet, jazz, like it's really cool. In fact, I'll play a little clip here of him doing King Lear.
King Lear struggled to his feet. Big D helped him get up. King Lear said, I feel something in my bones. There's a shaking in my hand, earthquake in my soul, eyes got old. Bring me a looking glass that I might see myself. And the servant brought him a looking glass. And King looked in that glass, and he said, I got old. I hate to go. All my stuff I got can't take it with me. He said, come here, my darling daughters, I'm your papa. I've got to die.
And if you weren't convinced about how cool he is, all of that came after he served in World War II. Like the dude's a legitimate badass.
Yeah, he is. And the butterfly thing.
Yeah.
That's what he did in real life. Yeah. That was his like signature, the blue butterfly.
I was about to say, you could find pictures of him right up until his death where he's just like walking around and he has the butterfly on him and stuff. So that was
pretty. I don't know, that was a really cool revelation for me because I did not know who this guy was, and I went down a rabbit hole of watching like YouTube videos of him performing.
Well, you watch it and you're immediately like, this is one of the coolest characters. I mean, there are several, but you just like listening to this guy talk, which is good for this movie since there's going to be that, and you got a guy who's interested in what he has to say.
Yeah.
Well, even when he's on screen with Ed Harris, you're just kind of, when he says stuff, you're like, all right, hey, everybody shut up. This guy's talking.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a really captivating performer. And I'm not done going through this guy's stuff. He's pretty awesome.
So financing for the film was provided by United Film Distribution as part of the 3-picture deal that was struck after the success of Dawn. We talked about that briefly during that episode. The budget for this film was the biggest of any Romero films so far. This is about twice the budget of Dawn of the Dead, about $3.5–4 million. And they shot most of the film in Fawn Township, which is a little city outside of Pittsburgh, on an area of land that was owned by the local outdoor sportsman's club. They basically, every time that they move in the film, land that was owned by the local outdoor sportsman's club. They basically, every time that they move in the film to like a different city and set up, they're setting up on the same piece of land every time. And it's, because all they needed was a piece of flat earth, Yeah,
I was going to say, I bet they just, all right, let's point the camera this direction and we're in a different city.
Exactly. Romero began shooting in May of 1980, and it was almost immediately set back by torrential rains, which destroyed most of his outdoor sets. And there were some interiors filmed. They used a local warehouse there nearby and kind of converted it into a soundstage. But about 80% of the film is set outdoors. So when there are weather problems, that's a major setback for them.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely read stuff about it being delayed during rain, especially. But that at one point, the warehouse for indoor shooting was flooded by a cloudburst, and then
Wow.
and then like the second day of filming, a tornado hit the area and swept.
Oh my God!
Wow.
Yeah, it's just insane. But another interesting thing too there is I was reading notes from the commentary, so I didn't actually go there and listen to it. But they said that Romero mentions in one of the commentaries, at least, that Holly Hunter was a Carnegie Mellon student at the time and was a production assistant there.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Yeah, so I just thought that was a little interesting side note.
Nice. The film was not well received when it was released, not by critics or by audiences. And I don't know if that was a matter of expectation. You know, people see from the director of Dawn of the Dead comes Knight Riders, and there's this badass poster that looks like it could be like a post-apocalyptic movie with guys, you know, riding around on motorcycles. That's what I kind of always assumed.
That's what I thought based on that too. Yeah.
Because you've got a like a motorcycle that's got armor on it, and you've got a guy dressed like a knight, you know, with a sword or whatever. And it looks like it could be like a Mad Max style movie. And then it's mostly like a hangout, like a motorcycle that's got armor on it, and you've got a guy dressed like a knight, you know, with a sword or whatever. And it looks like it could be like a Mad Max style movie. And then it's mostly like a hangout movie, like a bunch of people talking and hanging out. And there is a plot, but it's secondary to other things that Romero is trying to do here. It has developed a cult following. A lot of people really love this movie. People who appreciate it for what it is without those expectations, I think, on it. You know, this is basically a very personal character drama from a guy who normally does make zombie movies, you know, so.
Right.
You look at the poster, and then it's very off-putting. It's been a thing and a theme in some of this with him. It's like this poster looks like you said, I immediately thought like a Mad Max style thing. It's like these knights, but they're riding motorcycles. It's probably futuristic, but they're wearing medieval clothes or something. Yeah. And but then also Ed Harris, who I didn't even the guy in the poster that's the familiar art, and he's got a goofy kind of grin on his face too. So you're like, oh, maybe it's like kind of a slapstick comedy. I did not know going in that I was getting like, I mean, the only thing I could compare it to is like Easy Rider or something like that.
Right. Yeah. I in looking at all that, I had a thought and it's gone now. Never mind.
All right. Well, bye.
Sorry.
For everybody asking though, because I know you're out there right now, and you're asking, and you're like, but what about Knight Rider? I did see that the Knight Rider came out the next year, I think. I was looking at this, and but I think the producers got a payment from the show so that they could keep the name Knight Rider for the show. They could retain the usage and not have to change everything around or something.
Okay, I remembered my thought. Got his reputation as this horror movie guy. But if you look at his horror movies, they're all really character driven. You know, you got 3 people trapped in a house. You got 4 people trapped in a mall. You got this kid walking around the city doing all kinds of weird stuff. And we're watching him develop. And then we're watching another group of friends in a house and what happens to them and how things unfold and what we learn about their characters. So for this to be thought of as a departure for Romero, I don't see it, because he really does take the time. And I mean, it's a long movie, but I think all of it keeps moving. And a lot of it, I think it's a departure in that
there are no horror elements to it at all. Like this
there's
for people who are especially for
depending
people
on how you feel about the Savini bikini. How you feel about the Savini bikini?
Yeah,
and I get it. This is a difficult one to defend to folks who are expecting a George Romero like genre movie, because this is not a genre movie. It's definitely not a horror movie. It's really not even a genre movie, despite what the poster might make you think. It is a straight character drama.
Yeah.
And I was listening to our Martin episode recently, and Gary made this point that if someone went into that movie expecting a horror movie from the guy who made Night of the Living Dead, they might be disappointed. And that movie was a character drama as well, but at least sort of had the idea of like, maybe there's a vampire in here. Whereas this movie doesn't even try to pretend to be that. So like, if you go into this expecting the kind of movie that you're used to from Romero, I could see people being put off by that.
Can I just say though, that like, I thought about Martin a lot during this movie, and just in my dreams, and he just visits me sometimes. No, but I thought about that same thing with Martin, about how like I was expecting like a vampire movie, and then I got this other thing that Martin was, and I didn't end up loving Martin as much as a lot of people do. So similarly, I had all of these thoughts about this movie and what it was going to be, and then it ends up being this 2.5 hour movie about this roving circus act, basically, like the Ren Fair people putting on this thing. And it took me, I bet, 45 minutes to really wrap my head around, this is not going anywhere else except that this is just about these people. And but I ended up fucking loving this movie.
Yeah,
like,
really. I was honestly
really loving it.
I was expecting you to dislike this movie, because I know that you don't often like movies that would be considered like slow. And I don't think this is a slow movie, but it's
that first of all, but maybe you're right. But maybe,
I mean, that's something that you comment on often when you don't like a movie.
I think that sometimes things could be long, and I could watch this movie and tell you it's 2.5 hours. And I could say like, yeah, probably too long. And I thought that, and then I thought, what would I cut? I don't know. I don't know what I would have cut from it. It all felt relevant. It all felt good. And no, like legitimately finished this movie. Once I finally, it's been a hell of a week, but once I finally got through it, immediately tried to find that Arrow video release. That's how I know that it's expensive and that it's hard to find, because I wanted to buy it. Like I wanted to own this movie physically. And that does not happen every time with movies we talk about. And there was something about this movie that really hit me big time. And like when I say I love this movie, like I mean like love, like I want to watch it again, because I feel like it could really work its way into like one of my favorite movies. And I know that sounds crazy, but I really dug this movie. Like love, like I want to watch it again, because I feel like it could really work its way into like one of my favorite movies. And I know that sounds crazy, but I really dug this movie, and I cannot believe I've never heard of it.
Well, that's what we're all about, like helping people discover movies, including ourselves sometimes. And, and the thing is, it is long, and it feels like it's 2.5 hours long, and it is often unfocused. It just sort of, it's a story that kind of meanders from one setup to the next, but that's because Romero is less focused on plot here. It's not a film that's driven by the story, by the narrative, as much as it is just by the characters that you're hanging out with.
I think it's that you legitimately have a ton of characters to care about, and it gives you something with each one.
Every one of them. That's the thing, and that's the opening of the movie. The very opening is, you see it's Ed Harris like having sex with the lady, his queen, and self-flagellating like in a river. And you're like, what the hell is this movie? Very well be a medieval film until you see him walk up and get on his motorcycle. But then after that, you meet the rest of the troupe, the Ren Fair troupe. And I think Romero does this really, really well, because he does, like, every one of the characters, even the little minor characters, they feel real. They feel like lived in, like you get to know enough, even if you can't name all the characters, you know enough about them and about their relationships with each other to care about them. Even, like Christine Forrest, and like she's, kind of treated bad by her boyfriend, Tom Savini, but you don't spend a lot of time with her character in the movie, but you spend enough time to where you kind of get invested in each of them. And the thing is, George Romero he takes his time introducing you to all this. The opening, what would be considered the opening of the movie, where you're meeting all the characters and seeing like seeing an example of what they do as part of this troupe. It's 40 minutes of the movie. Like, it's literally 40 minutes of the movie. That's like their first seeing an example of what they do as part of this troupe. It's 40 minutes of the movie. Like it's literally 40 minutes of the movie. That's like the opening act or whatever, which is normally, 20 minutes of a movie.
And maybe I'm an idiot, but I'm watching this thing and
You are.
Yeah, thank you. But there's an earnestness about every single character that's in this movie about what they're doing.
Yeah.
That I think I just think that most other movies would completely miss this. But there's something about, even with Savini and Ed Harris, especially with them, their interactions in this thing that I was trying to lock down like what the hell was happening in this movie, because you're like, well, they're clearly in present day, 1981, because like there's an audience, but they're also having these discussions like they're really these people, and
they're living by that code as if
they're like really living this code. And there's moments where with the heavy mallet, where it was like Savini's really tried to take his spot as king, and you're like, wait, what is happening here?
They take it very seriously.
Exactly. So it's just kind of interesting, and it never comes to me. It never came across as goofy.
No.
You're just like it. They felt like they believed it.
Yeah, like you said, there's an earnestness to it. Because of the way he treats the characters in this, I almost feel like it would work really well as a TV series. Like if where you get to like live with these characters over the course of multiple seasons. And Romero, if he were making this now, working today, I think that's probably how he would do it, because that's what he enjoys to do, is hang out with these. Like in the commentary for this, he jokes that the original cut was 17 hours long. Now he's probably exaggerating there, obviously, but he does say that he usually prefers his. But I feel like if he were making this now, it could very easily be edited to like a 12-hour series that just follows this, and with the same arc, just with more room to breathe a little bit, because I feel like he cares enough about the characters to want to do that.
Did either of you guys happen to watch Sons of Anarchy?
Yeah, I quit a few seasons in because it's
okay. In watching Knight Riders, I feel like yes, this could be this, especially if they were to do it again, could be a really great series. And it actually kind of made me want to revisit that first season of Sons of Anarchy, just because so much of it was so heavily based on Hamlet. Yeah. And in looking at things like that, and of course with the King Arthur comparison, I think it would be really interesting to revisit this in with the King Arthur comparison. I think it would be really interesting to revisit this in like a 10, 12 episode series on, some streaming service or whatever, where they could get away with, some heavier stuff and, give it the full treatment. I think it'd be awesome.
What's crazy about this one to me, though, is he does lean into the King Arthur. These characters are the characters from that story. Just with some different names here and there, and like a more modernized version of that. It plays out exactly like that story, but the better part of that is that, even for me, like I didn't have these notes or the backstory on it yet. I was going into it like sight unseen, and I could tell there's certain movies, man, that just like for all night, but there's certain movies like when we got into like on the old show, like a Eraserhead, or I can't think of another one right off the top of my head, but when you talk about like, this is that person's brain, like right on screen. And it's like, I was watching this and I was like, this, like Ed Harris is George Romero. And this is like him battling with his life here.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what he's feeling right now. And it's perfectly displayed.
I think that's why this movie strikes a chord with people, and especially with a lot of creative people. A lot of writers, film writers and stuff are really into this movie. And I think it's because, and I think this is probably also why Romero considers it one of his personal favorites of all of his films, because this is a story about a man who lives by his principles. King Billy is not in this game to make money or be famous. That's why he gets so money or be famous. That's why he gets so aggressive in his refusal to sign that kid's magazine. That's why he doesn't want to do it, because he's like, this is not what I'm doing this for. This is how I live my life. And because Billy, he is Romero. He's not as likable as Romero. He's kind of an asshole about his ideas, whereas Romero, everyone seems to love Romero, and he just seems like a great guy, But he does represent an indie filmmaker who isn't trying to get rich and go Hollywood, which is what Romero stood by. He's just trying to live by his own principles, and then the rest of the casting, the rest of the troupe are his cast and crew. Like, he's an indie filmmaker, and these are the people helping him make the movie. Even some of the elements of what the other members of the troupe do are very similar to like a film set. You've got like people running sound and things like that, making music. Yeah. So it's very similar to like they're making a movie. That's his metaphor essentially in this.
But what's even cooler about it for me too with him is that when you watch this movie, like you get, I mean, my God, I feel like you get so much of who Romero is as a person, and as far as what you see in other movies of his. Like Knight Riders has a similar plot point to like every other movie that Romero does. It almost feels like we'll see it coming up in others. We've seen it already. Just this idea of like he loves the ingenuity and the humanity and what it can do, and like so he likes this little group of people, like they've develop this life for themselves, but then he also like hates the outside world and what it will do to you, and that those guys are the villains, and it'll make you tear yourselves apart because of everything that's like coming to get you from the outside. But I also like that it does feel optimistic at points, which I feel like sometimes he's lacked. This one. Yeah, and that wasn't even originally his idea, like we discussed. But like this one, I feel like it's sad, but it's also kind of it's sentimental. It's a happier ending. But where else was I going with this? I've got so much like thoughts about this movie. But I also love that he's able to look at Ed Harris's character, as King Billy, is George Romero. A lot of people would take that position and write that guy as like the ultimate hero, and I don't feel like that happened at all.
He's much more complicated. He's a very complex character who
that maybe Romero even is willing to objectively see himself like he's got these principles, but also maybe he's being kind of a dick about this whole thing.
Yeah,
and maybe that keeps it from being bigger. And so I don't know. It's just it's a really cool, complex look at someone.
Well, with the ending being what it is, you get this great moment of Ed Harris crowning
Are we talking about Mom's vagina again? In 81.
Hey.
Hey-o. No, but you get this great moment of Billy crowning Morgan, and they have this really, and it's because they speak. I felt like when they were speaking to each other in that moment, like maybe that wasn't even scripted. It felt like such a genuine moment that you almost get a little bit of it, and I found myself leaning forward to hear what they were saying, just because that felt like such a close moment. And then when Billy, when Billy's destiny finally catches up with him, it ends very, very somberly, but you get this great moment. You get Merlin sort of waving goodbye, even to the camera, like he can very somberly, but you get this great moment. You get Merlin sort of waving goodbye, even to the camera, like he can, he's able to see through the lens to the audience and just say, "Yep, this is the end of our story." And then you get this kind of cool rebirth of Morgan leading the pack down the road to their kingdom's continuance. And it's all kind of, you get this big life and then death and then rebirth. It's a really fantastic journey to watch these characters go on, even over 2.5 hours. Again, like Gary said, I don't know what I'd cut. It's all important.
It's all relevant. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, and Billy, he's living this life because this is a place where he can live out. This is who he is, and this is where that's accepted, you know, and not everyone in the troupe shares those ideals at first. Morgan comes around to it, but Morgan, when he is in the early parts of the film, he likes riding motorcycles and he likes getting drunk and fucking. Like, that's why he's there. Yeah. That's what he's there for. Yeah. Like someone who gets into filmmaking for the fame and fortune, right. You know? And he eventually does get tempted away by a shifty agent, which, by the way, you know who that was? Martin Ferrero, who played the agent Jurassic Park.
Oh yeah, that's right. I was like, I know his face. I can't.
Yeah. He's the lawyer who gets eaten on the shitter.
I also love that the name of that company was something like Silver Bullet Enterprises.
Yep.
Silver Bullet Enterprises. So it's like, this is the thing that's going to kill this whole thing. I always thought.
Yeah.
But then he quickly finds out that the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, we call it, are not what he's made it out to be. Or not what he's made it out to be, which is something that Billy knew all along. That's why he never sold out. And that goes back to, this is why Romero spent most of his career in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, he could be king, you know, but in Hollywood, the king is the guy with the money, the guy with the pocketbook, the guy who's financing everything, because you are kind of at their mercy at a certain point, which Romero would find out later on in his career. He would succumb to the temptations of Hollywood, and it made him miserable.
Well, and Savini plays that innocently enough that it's like he is easily the villain of the story, but he's also like, he just wants the next big thing, and he thinks he's ready to be the king, and so he doesn't understand why he can't go ahead and have that spot, and so he wants something bigger, something better. He's always looking. It's like an understandable of one of these people, though. And so by the time he gets there and he starts to see how much it eats everyone alive, he just wants to get back. And,
And I love that the idea, that Romero's idea, because he was not a Hollywood guy, that his idea of like Hollywood debauchery is guys in a hotel room like smashing lights, just throwing lamps at each other.
These scared girls on the bed. The guys aren't even interested. They just beat the shit out of each other.
And that's like the come to Jesus moment for Savini in this movie. It's like, oh no, this is the Hollywood is horrible. This is what it's come to, and that's what like pushes him back towards the troupe. And then of course he becomes the king, at the end. But what's fun about the way Romero does that even is that there's no twist. There's no cheating. Like, he just wins. He just wins. And Billy just hands over the crown. At this point, Billy is ready, and he has realized that his time to move on has come, and he just hands over the crown. At this point, Billy is ready, and he has realized that his time to move on has come, and he just hands it over. And I don't know. I feel like Morgan's learned his lesson that like living that artistic life is better than money, because that's what Romero seems to live by. He's in it for the art, not for the money, you know?
Yeah, you can give up all this to go for that, but you're giving up all of this that you've grown to love. And so you'll never you can't have both. And so he realizes what means more to him. And so it's nice.
Which also includes stealing Billy's wife.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's Lancelot. You know, that's
that's Alan.
Yeah, Alan is Lancelot. He's which is what happens with Arthur. You know, and it's not Maid Marian. Why can I think of Arthur's woman's name?
Guinevere.
God help me, Maid Marian. It's like but anyway.
Well, in talking about the women playing a very important role here, I feel like when Morgan gets to a place where he's become the king of this new kingdom, and he thinks he's found his queen, she kind of brings all that crumbling down for him. And I feel like once he's confronted with the fact that like, oh, you're just another guy that I'm banging while my significant other is out of town, and that sinks in. And then of course he goes back to the hotel room and finds the guys just trashing it. He's like, you know what? This reality is more fake than what I had going on with Billy and the troop out in the woods.
Man, it's funny that we've talked about this so much already, and we've barely like mentioned like Tuck, Friar Tuck,
right,
which is not even from Arthur. He's from the wrong legend.
That's Robin Hood. Yeah,
that's right. Robin Hood with Maid Marian. But what a funny character, and just he's comic relief, but he does fit into the story. He's not just comic relief. And I mean, there are so many great little side moments like that, though, like the Alan and the like groupie girl that he hooks up with, and him trying to get her away from her abusive families, this whole extra side plot. And I think I did not look this up, Gary, so maybe you did, but the guy who plays her father, who she calls like a fat slob, is that the racist cop from the beginning of Dawn of the Dead?
Man, it could have been. I did not look that up. No,
I think it might be. Speaking of that scene, by the way, Mr. Stephen King, whose birthday is today as we're recording this, has a silly little cameo in there. Has a silly little cameo in there as Hoagie Man, as he's credited in the end. Hoagie
with his
Man,
wife.
Yeah, Tabitha. Yeah, him and his wife are there. So that's why I made the kind of quip earlier that this would make a good like TV shows, because you've got all these little great characters who have their own little side plots. They've got their own little side stories that are really interesting as well, even if they're not the main meat of the film. Right.
Well, that was the interesting with the character of Julie, and she gets together with Alan. I think you said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you watch her as she's packing up in her bedroom, she's got the one pop culture boy poster on the one wall, and there's another one by the door. She's enamored with these figures poster on the one wall, and there's another one by the door. She's enamored with these figures. And when she starts traveling with the troop and then sees like, oh, we're just going to go to this house and hang out with these people, I thought this was going to be like adventure and stuff all the time. She got enamored with the performance and thought that was their entire life. And when she found out it was something deeper, she wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
Or found out she didn't want it. But then she got dropped off at the life that she had, which is infinitely worse.
Yeah, much worse. So, that actress, by the way, that's Patricia Tallman, who was on Babylon 5 for years.
She did a bunch of Star Trek work too.
Yeah. So let's talk about the end of the movie a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we've talked about, where Morgan's journey kind of ends with him. The guy who's just called Indian is the character's name in it.
Right.
So they go off on
also a badass. Like just
he's great.
Yeah, he's cool.
But the first thing that he does is he finds that fat cop from the beginning of the movie who was giving them such a hard time, who he told, I'll find you later. And he finds him and beats the shit out of him in a McDonald's.
Yeah. It becomes like a whole victory reel for Billy.
Yeah.
I love that he goes to see the kid who wanted the autograph and hands over his sword and armor and everything, which, by the way, can we talk about how lax school security was?
Yeah.
Fucking guy just walks in a full suit of armor with a full-size sword.
Yeah. Different time. That's cool. Also, like half the wall was peeling off, so I don't think that they really had a lot of funding to worry about security, much less what would happen if King Arthur busted up in
the one room in the 80s.
Yeah. And we also see that he's still wounded from the battle earlier, that his wound has reopened, and because he's bleeding, and then he sort of like hallucinates and like sees a vision of him as an actual knight, and then he gets run over by an 18-wheeler. Just smush.
Yeah.
He like plays chicken with a semi.
Yeah, so. Don't do that. Yeah. You're gonna lose.
My thought is what is Indian thinking? Because he's just like, well, shit.
Well, that sucks.
That's. Maybe he saw that coming, but I don't know. It just
it's a wild ending.
Yeah, but it felt good for him, and the whole thing just feels, I don't know.
How do you think that works? How do you think that Billy's death works into the theme of Billy as Romero in this movie? How do you think that?
I was literally sitting here thinking about that. Like what is that saying? Like
death works into the theme of Billy as Romero in this movie. How do you think that?
I was literally sitting here thinking about that. Like what is that saying? Like it's just.
I'll go ahead and chime in with my 2 cents. If you notice, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's actually hit by a fuel truck. It looked like it looked like some sort of tanker.
Okay.
Which I thought was a little ironic that they were doing all of this just making enough money to, for lack of a better phrase, put gas in their tank to get to the next town and do the next show. And it's kind of funny that ironic that he got killed by the thing that they were all trying to get so earnestly. What can be gleaned from that is that I think in what we on a shelf, like you make art for it to be seen, but there's definitely 2 sides to that coin. And I think in trying to pursue that, there's a risk of it, quote unquote, killing you.
Okay.
And I think like you said, we may get into a little bit more of that as he sort of slides in that direction a little bit later in his career.
Yeah, I almost feel like Romero saw this as the end of an era for him. So Billy, the independent guy, dies. The end,
right.
Because the 70s, this is being filmed in 1980. The 70s were the only truly independent decade of Romero's career, because his follow-up to this movie would be released by Warner Brothers, one of the biggest film studios in the world. He would work within the studio system a couple of times after that and eventually go back to being independent. But
I think that's where I landed too, was that it was about just letting it go.
And I almost feel like he saw the writing on the wall that it's inevitable that I'm going to have to work within the studios if I'm going to keep making this. And this is like the independent in me is experiencing a death of some kind,
Yeah. He's just he's just walking away from it basically.
Yeah.
And it's great. And it's, because I feel like one of the things it wrestles with is that the whole, I love that it's complex. I mean, all of life is, and this is, he does a good job of tackling, like showing, like I said, with Billy, just sometimes he's the prick and all of that. It shows that humanity outside what you're afraid of, it is garbage. There is a lot of garbage, but it's also very ignorant to avoid it. And there's this balancing act somewhere in there. There's this balancing act somewhere in there. So he realizes he's Billy, like tied up in this situation. Like he doesn't want to let go and walk out into the rest of it, but also it's coming. It's going to get you anyway. Like these people are sneaking in the cracks, like it's going to happen. And if you just pretend that it's not there, it tears everything else apart too. Well,
and to sort of, build off of that, in thinking about it a little bit more, like that whole epilogue of Billy's, I feel like each of those things says something different that Romero was either trying to solidify within himself or
punch a cop in the face.
Who doesn't want to do that, honestly?
Yeah. But each of those things were, important. Each of those things were, important elements to him. Like, yeah, he goes and finds the cop and beats the shit out of him. But I think what's to be taken away from that is he kept his word. Yeah. And I think in an industry where a lot of times people hang their hopes and dreams on someone's word, it's important that someone's word be worth its weight in gold.
Well, how about he also hands, everything about himself there off to that kid. Like maybe there's another generation.
I was thinking about that. The kid wanted an autograph from his idol.
Yeah.
What Billy gave him was something to live up to, was he gave him that, and that kid's not strong enough to lift that sword. But you know what? He's going to try, and he's going to try a lot. And I think that's going to make him. He gave him that, and that kid's not strong enough to lift that sword. But you know what? He's going to try, and he's going to try a lot. And I think that's going to make him. That one moment's probably going to turn that kid's life around, just like someone's art can, create a path for them for the rest of their lives. I know it's been true for me, and I'm sure, you guys have probably seen that in your own lives too. Maybe not with any one particular thing, but maybe a couple different things where it's kind of set you on a path.
Well, I think that him going back to the kid, I think you're probably absolutely right there. I think another way that I see it though is he is accepting that the kind of hero that the kid looked up to him as like a motorcycle stunt man, like that kind of character. And he's accepting what he's become rather than this weird self-styled image that he was trying to cultivate. What he thought that he was, he's accepting who he actually is, which is sort of the case with Romero. Maybe he was starting off being a filmmaker who wanted to make a movie like an Ingmar Bergman, type movie, Wine of the Fawn, but he finally accepted, hey, I'm the guy who makes zombie movies. And that's why this kid wants my autograph, because I'm the guy who makes zombie movies and he likes my zombie movies.
And you think about all the modern films where you sit down and you talk to the writers, the directors, hell, even some of the actors, definitely the special effects people who Dawn of the Dead, Night of the Living Dead, all these, great 60s and 70s horror films, that was where their life began. And it set them on that path that I was talking about.
Of Knight Rider's shoot, Romero and Rubenstein were already hard at work on future projects, which actually included an adaptation of Stephen King's The Stand. That's why Stephen King's in this movie, because they had become friends. They were becoming friends because they were working together on that. And also they were working on a possible third film in the Living Dead trilogy, but they actually decided to wait on that because at the time, Dawn of the Dead was still playing in theaters, because that's how movies kind of were released back then, even though the movie was already 2 years old by that point. They wanted to allow it to live that life in theaters and just continue to work on, give it legs if you can. You keep making money off of it. At the same time they were working on those, they were working on another collaboration with Stephen King that was not based on a book of his. And that's the movie we're going to talk about next week, of course. I said Dawn's probably his most popular film. This one gives it a run for its money. Next week, we're talking about Creepshow.
Ooh.
We're going to talk about next week, of course. I said Dawn's probably his most popular film. This one gives it a run for its money. Next week, we're talking about Creepshow.
Ooh. Nice.
If you guys want to find where to stream Creepshow, visit our website, cinemashock.net. We'll have links on there to Just Watch where you can find out where it's streaming and everything. I think that's all we got about Knight Riders. I think it's time to wrap this up before this episode.
I hate that because I still want to talk about his whole crew, just how gay, straight, black and white, and everybody, all these people like in this perfect little community, and they're trying to hang on to it. Even, we were talking about the ending. We didn't talk about like the ending right before the epilogue about Ed Harris's, that whole scene really taking place. Like, it was interesting to me. Sorry, I know we're trying to wrap up, but just that the show right before the last show was like the crowds taking over everything and things to like read into, like about, like the fans are involved and like now you've got the agents and all of these other people. That it was just nice to have this last show. They did a freaking show. Like he always said, like Ed Harris, I think Billy says in the movie, like, we're not an act, like a couple of times. And that last thing is like them with no audience, like doing the thing. Like, you mentioned Savini actually just going and winning the spot.
They won't even, like, they even ask the lady who's trying to take pictures to not do it. He's like, let's just keep this in the family.
Yeah.
And
I just think that's so, I loved this movie. I thought it was great. And you will be disappointed, by the way, if you go and you're expecting any of the things that it looks like you should be expecting. But if you just want like a good, just character-based story. Like it's just I really enjoyed it, and I do not think Romero is going to top this in anything that we watch from here. Like I can't.
I'm going to go right along with Gary. In case you guys might have been wondering whether or not Todd likes this movie, I really like this movie. It's really good. And again, I was just so taken in by some of the performances here. And yeah, if you begin to scratch the surface, you will find that there is layer upon layer of depth with this in terms of plot, in terms of story, and it's worth it just to see Ed Harris opposite Tom Savini, because they have such a great yin and yang to them, and it's really awesome.
I know everybody needs to go, and we've gone so long, but this is legitimately such a great movie that also I pitched earlier, and I'm just going to do it. And if you guys don't like it, but you folks at home, let us know, because you're who matters. I wanted to introduce a segment called movie that also I pitched earlier, and I'm just going to do it. And if you guys don't like it, but you folks at home, let us know, because you're who matters. I wanted to introduce a segment called Somebody Needs a Nap. And so I have these 2 quick Amazon reviews that I found. I just went and looked, and it was like 1 out of 5 stars on both of these. So I just wanted you to hear them.
1-star reviews.
Since we've gushed, it's a different perspective. This is from Seven Castle Forest. And he starts out this way. This is not me saying this. He says, quote, "I'm not exaggerating a word of this. I think something happened to George Romero at some unspecified point after he made the original Night of the Living Dead. That first film was a masterpiece, but pretty much everything else he ever made was either average or unbelievably awful. Knightriders falls into the latter category. It is pointless, unwatchable, off that easily. It's not bad in a funny way, like an Ed Wood movie. It's bad in a completely serious and tragic way, like if your dog were to get run over in the street. That's how awful this film is. I love movies, and I never thought I'd say this about a film, but this movie may actually be evil. It's like a diseased growth that people would pay a doctor a lot of money to remove. I seriously would rather watch a blank screen for the same length of time. Unless you've been hypnotized into liking George Romero's awful movies, which seems to have happened to a surprising number of people, do whatever you can to avoid this film. It is beyond anything you have ever imagined, and if I could give it less than 0 stars, I would not hesitate."
Well, somebody needs a nap.
Somebody needs a nap. The other one's a little quicker. He just said, how did Romero end up with so many loyal fans? George Romero was, in my mind, one of the most fantastic horror developers of all time. Night of the Living Dead was delightfully horrific. Great plot, development, not too many special effects, and a great ending. However, when I went to see Knightriders, I was so disappointed. I could not believe it. It was as if Romero had tossed himself into the garbage and let actors try to direct the movie themselves. Ed Harris is absolutely horrible, as is the supporting cast. The plot is so incredibly ludicrous, and wait for it, it's almost 3 hours long. So I had to sit around and befoul myself with the stench of motorcycle knights jousting for what seemed like forever. Ultimately, after Romero fans followed him from night to night, he spelled that with like night with an N. Yeah. I'm surprised at the high acclaim this movie attained. Next to Dawn, this is one of the worst movies ever written. So I asked the question, how are you doing it, Romero? Teach me your black hypnotic magic. I, for one, will not joust in this arena.
Wow.
I know we've been trying as we're getting, this rebranding off the ground to sort of book some interesting interviews and whatnot. I think we need to find these people and just, show us on the doll where the movie hurt you. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
Somebody needs a nap.
Yeah, clearly.
Well, thank you for sharing those, Gary. Do you guys have anything else before we wrap this up?
I don't think so. I guess we have to go, but this movie, for reals, so good. Love it.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you guys both enjoyed it. I wasn't sure where you were going to fall on this. So
You loved it though, also?
yeah. I loved it. I think it's outstanding. I watched it 1.5 times. I didn't finish the commentary on it. Didn't have time, but I will because I'm very interested in it. And it's
tough.
I didn't finish the commentary on it. Didn't have time, but I will because I'm very interested in it. And
it's tough because I know,
and it's a very fun commentary to listen to because it's like Romero and Savini, who are very likable and fun to listen to. Tell stories.
Nice.
It is tough, and I know it sounds like it could be like just a pretentious thing to say, but like it's like, oh, the zombie stuff, right? Well, it's like it's hard to knock that. Yeah, obviously, Romero is the zombie guy, and that's fine. But it's just like this is peak movie making. I feel like this guy left to his own devices actually did make an incredible film. Like an artful film, and it's kind of sad that it was kind of a goodbye letter to his independence. But
yeah, he jokes on the commentary that he's like, I think about 9 people saw this movie. So
yeah, I did want to say, and I'm sorry, I
on the commentary that he's like, I think about 9 people saw this movie. So
yeah. I did want to say, and I'm sorry, I know we're wrapping again, but I did see this quote from Ed Harris where in one of the interviews I was reading, somebody did call Ed Harris, and we didn't bring up too that Savini said that they all liked Ed Harris because he was supposed to be Romero, and so that was very difficult. Like, how are we supposed to hate George Romero? So Ed Harris, they were like talking to him, and they're like, how do we, like, do you have any weaknesses? Do you have any weird stuff about you we should hate? And he's like, I don't know. I'm trying to quit smoking. And they're like, you're a smoker. That's what's going to do it. We're going to hate. And if we see you smoking, we'll fucking hate you more. But Ed Harris on this interview, who is like, this was like 30 something years later. He said, he talked about that George was a beautiful, proud. Oh, this is right after his death. He said, George was a beautiful, proud, fine screenplays. Some he couldn't even get done. They weren't all horror movies, and that was part of the problem. He got frustrated with the business. I can't blame him. He was an important guy in my life, and I'm sorry that he's gone. But it just, I don't know, something about that like made me tear up a little when I was reading it the first time. I was just like,
I'm not crying. You're crying.
It was sweet. Just that he remembered him after all this time. And and Aaron Harris is going to show back up next week. So
sure, yeah.
Well, all right, I'll shut up now. I'm backing away from the microphone.
I think that's a good place. I think that's a good place to wrap it up there, Gary, with that quote. So I'm at Justin_Bishop.
I'm at This Is Gary Horn.
I'm at Mr. Todd A. Davis.
All right. You can find us at cinema_shock on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find us on Facebook and at cinemashock.net. Until next week.
May the wings of liberty never lose a feather.
Be excellent to each other. Don't you fucking do it, Tom.
I was just sitting here.